So you also join? Great.
Oh, this is Cambodia. Cambodia. I heard you traveled to Cambodia.
Yes, but
That in last year. On riding motorbike.
this is right. Well, that's too bad. It doesn't work yet. This works also. Yeah, dear students, welcome to our corporate finance class. I've been coming to Vietnam since 2008. So 2008 was really before VGU was actually founded. I spent here 1 year with my family in order to establish VGU. Yeah, so before the first class started. It was the Minister of Education of the state of Hesse, where Frankfurt is, our government. And the minister is a friend of mine, and he told me, Mark, I just founded a university. Now I need people to go there and really build this university. And yeah, when I came there, of course, there were no students, so we prepared, and I studied the Vietnamese education market, and I made many connections to university professors and to the government here in Vietnam. Yeah, and it's really, yeah, from that day on, I have been coming to Vietnam almost every year, usually for 2 weeks like this, and to teach. And over the time, I have been traveling through your beautiful country in almost all regions, probably more than most Vietnamese students ever traveled. Yeah, and I love it a lot. And before I start, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, and maybe you also tell me about yourself over the time of the course, during the break times also. So I was born in 1963. So when I was 11 years old, what we call the Vietnam War was over, and I was on the TV every day. So the Vietnam War was really my childhood, and I saw all the combats and so many dead people. Many Germans were suffering with the Vietnamese, because East Germany had Eastern and Western Germany, and Vietnam had North and South Vietnam. we were separated very much. On my first flight to Vietnam, it was really amazing. I was sitting between two people. One was a doctor, and an old doctor, and she said she had always been traveling to the south of Vietnam during the war in order to help the injured people. And on my other side was an old man, and he was an engineer from Eastern Germany, and he said he was traveling always to Haiphong in order to help to rebuild the city. So one was from Eastern Germany, he was communist, and he was traveling to Haiphong to help to reconstruct Haiphong. And the other was the doctor, she was from the west, and she was traveling to the south. But both basically had spent a large time of their life helping Vietnamese people to basically recover from the war. And I was amazed that they don't mind whether it was South or North Vietnam. They just wanted to help. And that's also what I loved. Yeah, when I was a student, I studied, of course, in Germany, and my first big experience in my life was a scholarship to the United States during my master's thesis. And I spent half a year in the USA, and it was very much what Germany is for you, it was the US for me at that point of time. It was a kind of dream country. It was much more developed, in particular in the area of finance. America was just leading, they were so good. And I experienced university how it should be. Everything was on the campus. Lots of discussions, not only courses, but very interactive. You could talk to your professor, you could meet the professors on campus. All the sports, all the theater and concerts and so forth was on the campus. Many dining halls, of course. Even a golf course was on the campus. It was really a little village or a town of itself. And unfortunately in Germany we don't have these nice universities. Our universities are for free, that's good, but they're not as beautiful as some American universities. But actually without that experience I would never have thought of becoming a professor. After my master degree, or at that point of time we didn't have, it was still the old diploma degree. You may know before bachelor and master we had only a diploma degree, but this was after roughly 6 years. Most people actually took 7 years of studying. In Germany the tradition, by the way, is you study whatever you like, when you like, you attend the classes if you like, and if you stay home, if you don't like the classes. And after 6 years, you have 2 weeks of exams. and that's all. And very few exams in between. That was the old system. Just the final exam at the very end of the whole program. And there was a tough exam, obviously, and you were I had to write 10 essays, and quite often the essays was just a single topic, like value creation in corporate finance, or pitfalls in hedging financial risks, and then you had to write 10 or 20 pages an essay, basically, and 10 of these essays was my exam. After my master, of course, I decided to go for a PhD simply because I thought that I was still so stupid and that I did not have learned a lot. And then honestly, after my PhD, I thought, well, now in the 4 years of PhD, I have learned so much more as compared to everything before, simply because you live very intensively together with the other PhD students and with the assistant professors, and you go to lunch and you have discussions with these people. And because I think you learn mainly with in these discussions, and in particular in the research talks that we had. So I felt much better educated after my PhD. And then came the big decision: do you want to stay in academia or do you want to go out? And then that was for me the toughest decision at all, because I actually felt that I have more challenge. I was completely overconfident, and I thought I can do anything that I want. When you are young, you feel extremely overconfident sometimes. I knew that a university professor in the long run gives you more freedom, but university is a bureaucracy, and I hate bureaucracies. I hate dynamic, well-managed corporations. And that's why I first went to McKinsey, to the most well-known consulting company. At that point of time, you had to have a PhD before you could work there. They only used PhDs for consultants. It was a very, very elitarian kind of consulting company. And we were only consulting the very big firms of Germany. And it was fascinating, but it was clear. I have had such a difficult decision, that before I went to McKinsey, I told them I come here only as a high-level intern, because I will leave and become a professor. My decision to become a professor was actually done before, but I didn't want to stay my whole life in the ivory tower. At least for some time, I wanted to get out. So it was 2 years in the consulting industry, first McKinsey, then another American consulting company. And then when I became a professor, I did one thing very good. I chose a small private university. VGU is a small university. My university was also a private one. So it didn't have this government kind of bureaucracy. And I loved it a lot. By the way, it was also a university without any tuition. Private universities usually charge a lot of tuition. But in Germany, we have some rich people, and they basically donated so much money. But this university offered education for free, although it was private. And that was wonderful in terms of the students. Still today, I know many of the students that I had at that time. But the bad thing is, the private universities in Germany were so small and so new, they had problems to attract the best faculty. And as a professor, you want to have the best other colleagues as well. So I was really suffering because the professors were not the quality that I expected. And then I got an offer from Frankfurt, and then of course Frankfurt in finance is the #1 in Germany, and therefore it was very clear that I would go there. But it also had big disadvantages, and the disadvantage is it is a public university. It's a large bureaucracy, and it could be much more efficient. It could be much more dynamic. So when I came there, I basically wanted to reform that university. And I wanted to make it a little bit like McKinsey, or a little bit like this wonderful private university. And that's why I've founded our business school. The business school is basically our executive education department, where we have MBA programs, but also executive education programs for people that are working practitioners. And they pay, and for what they pay, they really get great service. And Goethe Business School has really become successful. So the state university that offers education for free now also has a business school where people pay for their education and obviously are treated better. But they don't offer the same programs. The normal daytime programs are for free at the university, and only weekend programs for working professionals and shorter programs without a degree are offered at the business school. And but to put that on was fascinating, and I'm grateful that in Vietnam, I think, Vietnamese universities are still more bureaucratic than Germans are, that's for sure. Vietnam is a country where control of the government is very important, and therefore they tend to leave less room for freedom for the universities, for all kinds of agencies. In Germany it was at least possible to do this business school, but it was a fight. And I did some more fights of this, and I did two more things, and one is just right now. I was a startup manager, and when the internet came up, you have heard about the dot-com bubble. Many companies basically were founded in around 2000, and out of a research project, we had one of the biggest startup companies in Germany. I tell you the very easy concept. At that point of time, people were doing experimental stock exchange studies. Basically, they wanted to analyze in a room stocked with computers. They were basically changing the rules of the exchange, and then 20 or 30 students were basically playing the stock exchange. They were asked to buy and sell stocks, and then it was analyzed how changes in the system, changes in the computer code of the stock exchange would affect liquidity or the efficiency of prices and so forth. And of course, with only 20 or 30 students, you can't really simulate a real stock exchange. So with the internet, I thought it should be easy to use thousands of people on the internet. But of course, we don't want to have them in a boring stock market game. We basically said, let's use something that everybody loves, and this is soccer. The Soccer World Championship of 1998 in France. We took this, and we basically said, look, every stock is just a football soccer team. And the team that wins gets 100, and the team that loses gets 0. So the stock price is simply the probability that the team will win. You watch TV, you see the game going on, you see people are scoring, people are doing a penalty kick and so forth, and the stock prices immediately react. And the people loved this so much that we had 50,000 participants, and they all basically watched TV on this one hand side and played this stock exchange. And the stock exchange was highly professional. It was technologically wise, it was the same kind of computer system that also the Deutsche Börse has been using. And it was funded by the German Science Foundation, so it was a real research project. And then to our big surprise, the stock exchange is the volume of a stock exchange is the number of orders and the number of trades. And we had more orders and more trades than the German stock exchange. Just our computer system. Only the American stock exchange was still ahead of us. So, amazingly, with just a couple of students, we had built a computer system that was really capable of exercising many transactions every second. And there was really a miracle at that point of time. And that's why this company grew extremely quickly, because in the early days of the internet, the number of page impressions, the number of clicks by the users, were the most important metric, and our stock exchange simply produced a lot of this. And today I'm founding my second startup, but this is a longer term process, but our idea is vaguely described very easy. If you think what most bankers do, they analyze data. And they repeatedly analyze the same data. It's quite complex, but of course many things are repetitive. And in particular, repetitive is the work of stock market analysts. Think about all the Vietnamese corporations that are traded at the Ho Chi Minh City Stock Exchange. They usually have once a year an annual report and quite often quarterly reports. And after each of these reports, the analysts read these reports. They quite often sit together with the management and ask questions and receive answers, and then they write the analyst report. And we believe that at least 90% of this report can be written by artificial intelligence. So we basically want to train or to develop an AI that is generating reports much quicker than humans, of course, and much cheaper. This AI can, of course, support the analysts to write their own reports, so analysts will also become quicker and more efficient. But many people actually think that in the long run, maybe we need much less analysts. And we think that we've spent thousands of dollars just to buy all the analyst reports of the world. We download all the quarterly reports, financial reports, also the earnings calls. This is the transcript of the questions by the analysts and the answers by the management, because all this is the input to the analyst report. And and now we try to find out, with the large language models, with proper prompting strategies, and with more advanced stuff, but basically just using large language models and some tailored, specialized models in order to repeat what the analysts do, and use this huge amount of data as learning data or as testing data, in order to evaluate how good this is. And if you would be my master or bachelor student in Frankfurt, all my bachelor students this year wrote their bachelor's thesis on only one particular thing. They jointly developed a benchmark test for the AI of the future. Basically, they looked at the input, that is the financial report and the Q&A, and they looked at the output, which is the analyst report. And then the task was design questions, multiple choice questions, such that analysts would agree only B is correct, A and C are not correct, but an AI cannot yet. In the end, an AI should be as good as the analysts, and analysts, of course, know what the right answer is. And hopefully we will have 1,000 questions at some point of time, and then we can see what kind of AI is capable of solving this test. And just to give you an idea of how successful we already are, of course there were many steps in the work process, and we start with the simpler things. If you take a financial report of Win Group, for example, WinFast Group, you upload it into ChatGPT and you simply ask, what is the percentage change of revenues in the US market last year? ChatGPT will most likely give you a wrong answer. It cannot even extract the right numbers. Every human just reads the text. Of course, 500 pages, it's a long reading, but at some point of time, the text talks about the revenues in the US, and if you see the numbers, and you can easily calculate, of course, the percentage change. ChatGPT cannot. So Bloomberg, the big and well-known data company, they hired a lot of people, and they developed Bloomberg GPT. And Bloomberg GPT is a specialized GPT designed to answer precisely these questions. Just retrieving single numbers. So there was a benchmark test where the answer is always a number, a percentage number, or the revenues or the profit whatsoever. And Bloomberg tested its own Bloomberg GPT in a benchmark test, and they found that 43% of the questions were correctly answered. And this is basically their marketing material. They were so proud of having 43%. I think 43 is rather bad. It's more hallucination than anything else. More wrong than right. But for Bloomberg GPT, that's basically what they got. They invested a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of computing power in particular. They used the fine-tuned models, which uses a large amount of graphical processors. Yeah, and guess what? My PhD student, together with a friend, he tried out something different, and he got to 100%. Yeah, so this step is basically solved. Yeah, just by more advanced technology or better thinking or maybe a better idea. And it was not a costly model. Right? Maybe if you're familiar with AI, basically they were to develop a new model that cost you sometimes billions. Yeah? ChatGPT 4.0 has cost many millions, if not billions of money, just in order for the computers in the cloud, because it is so computing time intensive. But if you are in an AI startup and you don't have computers, then you basically try cheap things, and that is techniques like try out different promptings or retrieval augmented generation, which is just a simple variant of this. So this is what we do. We basically say we don't develop new models from scratch. We use ChatGPT or the like, but we make them much better by using some technologies. And that tells you a little bit what kind of things I find interesting. Yes? I'm a man who wants to change the world. I want to see the impact of what I do. My stock exchange really had a big impact. Thousands of people learned how stock exchanges really work from inside, just by looking at this. Sorry?
And I stay here to check the technical problem, so everything okay.
Oh, sure. We are fine here. Thank you. Yeah, and when I do research, I'm not coming from the technology side. I want to understand the world, and that brings me to corporate finance. Before you study corporate finance, you should know why actually do you study this. What is corporate finance actually about? If you explain to your parents why you studied this, what would your answer be? Any suggestions?
So you mean like, was this corporate finance when we explained it to our parents?
Yes.
Right? So actually I think corporate finance is the way that we can manage the financial problems and also making decisions about the finance of the companies.
Yeah. Making decisions.
Yeah.
But making the finances, that's actually the traditional way of finance. In the traditional way of finance is accounting. Accounting is about all the financials, and you need to have a transparency and an overview. And then finance actually becomes just number counting, adding up, and so forth. But then you point to decisions, and this is of course the most. Corporations make decisions. What are the most important financial decisions that a corporation needs to do? Raising capital? Both you? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Raising capital? What kind of capital do you mean when you say raising capital?
Whether it's through debt or the stock market.
Exactly. Yeah. If you need money, you can raise debt or equity. And the first question is, of course, how can you do it? Many people want to raise capital, but they don't receive any capital. So how can you convince investors or banks to give you the capital? And should it be debt or equity? And if it's debt, there are so many forms of debt. You can You can go to a bank and ask for a loan. You can go to the bond market and sell a corporate bond. If you ask for a loan, the bank may say, I want some collateral. Please give me seniority or some, give me your house as collateral, and then if you go bankrupt, the house is gone. So there are many, many financial contracts to choose from. But in the end, of course, it is about raising capital. What else is corporate finance?
To sell companies.
To what?
Sell company.
To sell.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. At some point of time, you look for a new owner. Mergers and acquisitions is a core part here. It's basically the question of who is the best owner for a company. And no, from the theory side. As a practitioner, you basically observe, there was a company and the owner is retiring and now he needs to sell, and so I look for a buyer. But of course, from an economic perspective, you think about who is the best owner for this company. Twitter, for example, when it was a standalone company, was completely different from after being purchased by Elon Musk, and now it's called X, and of course the whole company changed completely. The stock price, by the way, collapsed. So Elon Musk was clearly not the best owner in terms of the stock price impact. And of course, we want to study. Why do people buy and sell companies? What changes them? Are there more financial decisions to be made?
Capital budgeting.
Sorry?
Capital budgeting.
Capital budgeting? Yeah, this is what we start with today. Capital budgeting is basically you think about what kind of investment projects you are going to realize. So how to grow the firm such that, what is the objective of capital budgeting? Or what is the objective of anything? We said prepare decisions. In the end, a large part of corporate finance is actually asking what is the overall objective function that we should pursue. And traditionally, when I learned finance, this was really so it was completely different from today. When I was young, basically people said the finance department of a corporation has to make sure that there was always enough money available in order to run the company. We have machines and they produce cars, and we need to buy the materials, and the financial manager is simply there in order to serve that company and make sure that there was enough money to buy new merchandise and so forth. So there was no objective besides supporting or helping the production. Without finances, production stops. Which is, of course, a kind of low-level auxiliary function. What is today? When you ask American students that go for an MBA and that want to become executives later on, what is the most important function? They will say not production. Production is boring. To run a factory, if you just need to hire some engineers, they don't cost a lot of money. The king discipline is finance. Why is finance so much more important today? Well, why do financial managers quite often earn more money, and why do all the Harvard MBAs love finance and not so much production anymore?
Because if there's no cash, and if you don't manage the cash flow well, the company will go to bankrupt, and even though the production is good, it's meaningless.
Bankruptcy is, of course, the end of everything. And but nonetheless, many companies run a high risk of bankruptcy. If you think about all this leveraged buyout activity, I don't know whether you're familiar with this, but in the United States and also in Europe, there was a huge wave of basically private equity firms buying other firms, and usually with the use of enormous amounts of debt, and applying, of course, a high risk of bankruptcy. We will understand during the course why debt is so attractive, but the very easy answer is tax benefits. Taxes, debt is cheaper because it is tax subsidized by the government, and therefore private equity firms use it a lot. But then, of course, you need very, very detailed plans in order to prevent bankruptcy. And that brings us to another thing, that is risk management, of course. And you need to evaluate the stability of everything. Finance as a whole is about risk and return, nothing else. CAPM is just risk and return. And corporate finance is basically about, let's think about the objective function. Most professors in the world would say that corporate finance managers have one objective. If you really put this into just one expression, what would this be? Of course, they want to prevent bankruptcy. Of course, they want to raise capital. They want to do good capital budgeting decisions. But is there just one word that summarizes this all?
Maximization.
Yeah. What? Maximization is how?
So I think the risk one is minimize the risk and maximize the return.
Yeah. Guess more. I think you're so close to it. There was one buzzword. What do you maximize?
To the current resources of
No.
Valuation.
Huh?
Valuation.
Valuation. Yeah. Value maximization. And this is why I start with this. This is the maximum value. Well done. But of course, this is not the way that you should maximize value. But in the end, the objective of the financial manager is to create shareholder value. We call this shareholder value generation. Good investment decisions, good capital budgeting increases the value of the firm. Good leverage decision, a good balance between debt and equity should maximize the value of the firm. The best own an M&A. If you have an M&A transaction, in every takeover offer, the acquirer offers a price well above the stock price. So there was a big premium, and that premium actually says the company before had not maximized the value. The new owner can basically increase the value. And so it is a bit narrow because it's all about money, about value, nothing else. Of course, some people today in Germany think this is really too narrow. Financial managers should also think about the environment and about inclusion and things like this. And then banks in particular give only loans to green companies and help clean the society and so forth. And of course, when we think about M&A, we think about who is the best owner, and then again, we have a large discussion about corporate governance, whether it is actually good to have private equity firms or people like the owner of VinFast. They have lots of power. They may misuse this power in order to exploit other people. And then there was a big discussion on how actually the power in corporations should be distributed. When when I was young, there was Germany is a country not dominated by stock markets. Yeah, we have mainly family firms, and we have banks. Yeah, so the typical German firm, even the largest ones that you know, yeah, BMW, for example, Volkswagen, yeah, are family firms, yeah, that are majority owned by a family. Yeah, like VinFast, yeah, only a small part of the company they are stock listed, yeah, but only a small part of the stocks are actually traded. Yeah, they are managed by a family, and of course they have lots of bank debt. Yeah, because Germany was completely destroyed, like Vietnam, yeah, and if you start from scratch and rebuild a company, then the savings, the money on the savings account, is the first money that you can basically spend. So the German reindustrialization after the World War was basically financed by savings deposits of the small people that were allocated through banks to corporations, to family firms. Completely different in the United States. In the United States, you really have a big stock market, and instead of putting the money on the savings deposit, Americans put their money into a pension plan. And the pension plan is usually a stock portfolio. And for that reason, the stock market in the United States is so much bigger. If you buy all shares of the world, guess what percentage of American stocks do you have? All Europe, all Vietnam, all China, all Japan. The so-called world market portfolio. Any idea?
40%.
What?
40.
Yeah, it's even more. I think it's more than 50%. Yeah, but we're close. And then even more impressive, this 50% is basically half of that is traditional, and half of these is the so-called Magnificent Seven, the big tech companies. I think it's just enormous how important they've become. But just the comparison between Vietnam is a bit more like Germany. You have some rich families, and they now also like VinFast, they also issue some shares in the stock market. But these were only a handful of shares, and then you could easily drive the price up and down. And of course, if you look at the share price right now, VinFast was worth more than General Motors and worth more than Ford. I think on the peak they had 80 billion in market cap. And now they are back at 10% of this. So value generation should of course be value generation for the long run. Which financial managers hopefully do not exploit over-optimism in the stock market, or hopefully do not manipulate the stock prices, as we may have seen here. So value generation on a fair basis, of course, can only work if you have efficient stock markets. If there are analysts that are capable of identifying. So why did anybody buy a share for more than 60 if the true value turned out to be only 5? Underdeveloped capital markets may have stupid investors, but this was in the US, so it was probably more exploiting technology, and this was a very special kind of going public, SPAC, special purpose acquisition corporation, but details that are important here. So value generation is basically the Bible, and when in Frankfurt, if you think about the chemical industry of the world, it was once, a long time ago, completely dominated by Germany. And there were 3 big chemical firms in Germany. You still may know BASF, and Bayer. They are still existing today. And the third one was Höchst, and Höchst was located in Frankfurt. And then this chief executive officer of Höchst, 20 years ago, read a book on value generation. Rappaport was one of the most read textbooks for managers. And basically, Rappaport explained how to create shareholder value by, for example, changing the capital budgeting policy completely towards higher share prices of the debt equity choice, but also M&A decisions. And the most dramatic decision of Hoechst was they completely dissolved. Hoechst does no longer exist. It has been cut down into at least 20 different corporations. They all still live, but it's no longer a large group. So the shareholder value doctrine basically has led in a consequence to a liquidation or to cutting into pieces of a large conglomerate group. And again, if you look at VinFast, the Vin Group has hotels and cars and tourism and transportation and residential real estate. This is a typical conglomerate. And those conglomerates in the United States and Germany tended to be under pressure simply because corporate finance and the methods that we teach in corporate finance, the method how you increase shareholder value, in the end convinced the corporations to destroy themselves. And I have many people that have been working as managers at Hoechst, and they basically said, he was like Adolf Hitler. He destroyed our company. But if you ask the CEO, he said, I generated shareholder value. These are the perspectives. And what's good for the shareholder doesn't necessarily, is also may not be good for the managers, of course. If you are the manager of Hoechst, the corporate headquarters was basically no longer needed after this dissolving. So corporate finance is extremely powerful. And by the way, how can you incentivize managers to create shareholder value? Why should the chief executive officer basically destroy his own company only in order to increase the share price? What he did basically is he sold all the parts of the company and basically paid the money out as a special dividend. And all the special dividends received by the shareholders were much more than the original share price. So the shareholders really got rich. It was only that the company was gone. The trick is, of course, you need to incentivize him. And without managerial ownership, without managerial stock options, you would not see this. In the traditional German company, the chief executive officer was just a professional manager, and he was earning a good salary, maybe 1 million, maybe 2 million, but it was more or less fixed. And today, in the United States in particular, they earn a very small fixed salary. It's still 1 million, but if they create shareholder value, they can easily make this 10 or 20 million. And the people that serve on these jobs are quite often greedy, and they prefer strongly 10 million over 1 million. I honestly don't understand why, because I would not know what to do with all the money. But if people love more money, then of course they try everything to drive up the share price. So shareholder value maximization also has a lot to do with how can I incentivize people to do the right thing. And of course, right, whether it's right or wrong, it's up to you to decide. When shareholders basically, when I was young, shareholders had almost no power, in particular in Germany. The chief executive officers basically received a fixed salary. They had no interest in increasing the share price. And the chief executive officer was, of course, but if if you destroy your own company, of course that's very bad for your own reputation. Yeah, all your employees, all your neighbors will hate you. So yeah, that kind of personal relations, of course, kept people from not making these radical changes. Yeah, radical change is something where you have to fight against strong pressures, and therefore you need strong incentives to do so. Yeah, and that's why stockings, stock-based incentives are quite often very strong, but also private equity firms. Yeah, when they take over a company, they basically say, forget the past, in the future that company will only be managed in order to return high values, nothing else. And the impact is dramatic. Yeah. Think about Elon Musk after buying Twitter. What did he do to the employees of Twitter? Yeah, more than 90% are no longer working there. Yeah, so he fired 90% of the people, or at least 90% are no longer there for whatever reasons. Yeah, but it's amazing how dramatic this is. Yeah? And usually you would say with only 10% of the workforce, the business must break down. Yeah? But surprisingly enough, the profits are actually going up. So this history tells us that sometimes dramatic things are possible, and maybe we turn really bad. Yeah? If you think about the new Trump administration, they basically killed complete public bureaucracies. Yeah? Just imagine something similar would happen in Vietnam here. Yeah? Just unbelievable. Yeah? The government, of course, of Vietnam is much bigger than the government of the United States. Yeah? And if you have somebody like Elon Musk, who basically says, these thousands of public servants are no longer needed. Yeah? We just send them home, and let's see what happens afterwards. It's something that nobody would dare. Yeah? It's a high risk, and therefore finance is also risk-taking. Yeah? You increase value by taking risks. Yeah? And if you fail, that also belongs to it. Yeah? And you basically, you're going all in, as Americans say. Yeah? You risk a lot. You risk the whole company. Yeah? When Elon Musk should fail, he may easily go bankrupt. Yeah? He's the richest man today, but nobody knows whether he's still rich in 10 or 20 years from now. That could easily come very different. The first stock that I bought when I was young, of course, all the IT firms did not exist yet. Yeah? And in America there was IBM, and in Germany we also had a computer producer, Mr. Lixdorf, you don't even know the name. Yeah? But he was the most famous German guy. Yeah? He was rich, and of course, it does no longer exist. Yeah? Hardware manufacturers are all basically bankrupt, and my stock was also bankrupt, so that was not a good investment. It was one of the typical high-risk investments that did not survive. Okay, so let's move on to our lecture. So, unfortunately, we teach you only the fundamentals. This is really an introductory course. And the really interesting things, of course, in Frankfurt I teach an M&A class where we really go deep into M&A. And I teach a financial risk management class where we really go into advanced risk management topics. And there are so interesting classes on international finance, and in particular, I like really private equity a lot, what it does, and because these industries really apply corporate finance and also change corporations. And I think it's fascinating to see what kind of instruments they have in order to make so much money. A good friend of mine retired at the age of 50, and he is so incredibly rich, I can't believe it. And for the most part of his life, he was a rather junior banker, and only for 10 years he was working in private equity and simply was lucky. Yeah, he was lucky to have a series of investments where he got rich, and actually his birthday was last weekend, and I asked his colleague how it actually works, and basically they said when private equity funds buy a company, of course the fund, and that is the investors buy that company, but in the company where he was working, they have the rule that the manager also must co-invest. So if you work for this private equity fund and you buy a company for 1 billion, then you have also to invest 1 million of your own money. But how can you invest 1 million of your own money if you don't have any money? These are small, poor people. They get the money from the private equity firm as a loan. So these private equity managers have millions of loans, and if one or many of their investments fail, go bankrupt, then basically they have to repay these loans out of the profits of other companies. So if he gave me an example, one company was sold for 30 times the invested capital. You invest 1 million, after a couple of years you get 30 million back. That's of course make you rich. And if you have one of these deals, you can survive some failures of other deals. But the colleague also told me that for many, many years it was impossible to buy a house for him, simply because he had so much debt. Debt from the company, just in order to align the incentives. And then the private equity company basically said, we only trust in people that take the risk and that are willing to do this. It's not their own money, it's all money from the company, but it's a loan that they have to pay back. And of course that's really interesting, because that is incentives way beyond stock options. That is really, they are threatened with personal bankruptcy, these people. And easy to understand that after 10 good years, they retire. They say, this is a painful and stressful life. I don't want to continue this. He basically said it was ruining my health. And maybe also not a sustainable kind of living. But still interesting. This is you see what kind of I think it's an innovation. The first innovation was really high-powered incentives with stock options. But even these stock options do not work perfectly. And this innovation with high levels of debt, high levels of pressure on the people, finding nonetheless volunteers to do this, that creates a decision atmosphere where you can really, where you can do things like Elon Musk is doing. These people, of course, are extremely tough. If you talk to your banker and the banker says, I'm so sorry, dear entrepreneur, I can't give you more loans, then of course the banker will not lose anything. Suppose this banker is really somebody who bets his own money. That is simply different. But the advanced fundamentals of corporate finance really do not go in any of these details. This is the fascination of the topic. And before we start, I gave you 2 cases, and I hope you had the opportunity to go through it. These cases are really interesting. But your boss here, Michael Binder, of course wants to do this more or less as a PhD program. So he wants you all to develop into professors. But I know that many of you also want to know how the investment banking life is, and you are fascinated by these kinds of things. And therefore, I decided to have 2 cases that I usually do in my MBA class, into the more MBA type of things. And the one on time is really a classical case and easy. And just by reading the case, this is a nice it's like a criminal novel. Yeah? You see how people fight for control, yeah? And you see that managers at that point of time were really defending their power and their independence, yeah, without thinking what shareholders would do. Time managers actually acted in their own interest, obviously, and not in the interest of shareholders. Yeah, that was before they had these huge stock options. Yeah, when in an M&A, when two firms merge to one firm, usually you have only one chief executive officer remaining, yeah, and one management board remaining. Yeah, so M&A quite often means the end of the career, yeah, for one management team. Usually they take it over to management team. Yeah. Time was threatened by a takeover, yeah, and they clearly had no other objective than to prevent this. And the Time case is nice about this. So we will discuss this in the class in I don't know when, maybe on Friday, on Thursday. The second case is pure practice. This is my M&A class in Frankfurt. Is in collaboration with some investment banks, and the valuation case that I give you is basically the valuation case that is 100% the same that investment bankers also do. And I will show you the what the investment bank basically provided you with the case. Yeah? So when I present the solution, or because there is no solution, I present you what what the investment bankers of Citigroup basically did here. And if you work in M&A, of course, corporate valuation is the first core discipline. You first need to understand the value of bidder and target of every single company, and then you start thinking about how can you increase this value by takeovers, by changes in the processes, by methods like private equity exercise. So the company will be a well-known German company, Continental, the producer of tires and the producer of car electronics. And the nice thing with this case is really it's not like a Harvard Business case. I give you all the materials. Well, my students in Frankfurt actually go to the Bloomberg terminal and basically get a training in how to get all the data out of Bloomberg. And you basically, you can also see, no, it doesn't work. I tried to upload the video, but your learning platform is not capable of hosting this. It is just too big, the video. So basically you get the data that somebody took out of Bloomberg for you, on Continental, on all the peer firms, and you basically do exactly the same than the normal M&A bankers do. And if you think on how much time do I need and how do I do it, I think you can do it quick and dirty and more elaborate. You can do it alone or in teams. Investment bankers quite often get a Friday afternoon call. Please go to the pitching on Monday morning, and present your thoughts about our company, including your valuation. And then quite often the real-world investment bankers also have just Saturday and Sunday, like you, to do this. Of course, real-world investment bankers are then really under stress because when you present your results, it should be free of any grave mistakes. There are many things where you can discuss. And of course, this is the main reason why we do this exercise. It gives you the right questions and topics to discuss. And after you go through all the results, I think many people see the corporation differently from a valuation perspective. I think if you are an investment banker, you need to see the company like the stock market. And the stock market basically just thinks what is the correct value. Is the stock price too high or too low? as you saw before. Yeah? And you learned this. Yeah, so please feel free to form teams. I would advise you, this is not, well, although I will look at the assignments when I grade, but this is not very strictly graded. And if somebody says, I don't have the time on the weekend, I have other duties to do, then this is okay. And maybe if you form teams that are either working intensively or less intensively, they should be a bit harmonic. My students in Frankfurt quite often work long hours, the whole night through on these cases because they love it, but only because they know in advance, this is a one-time event, and after that I can sleep again. Of course, there is absolutely no necessity to do this. Also, if you don't have a lot of time, just going through all the materials just gives you a nice indication of what investment bankers' lives is about.
Sorry, just for a quick clarification. So on Friday we discussed on the time case, but then for the valuation case on Friday as well?
No, Friday I'm already gone. I will go to Da Nang and have a nice holiday over the weekend. And I leave you with work. So the time case, I hope that we can discuss this on Thursday. Or maybe next week, but I think Thursday will be okay.
So the valuation case for next week, right?
No, the valuation case is really for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And you should then turn it in latest on Sunday.
And when you mention discuss, you mean like just verbally discuss, or you expect some sort of like presentations?
But when I do this case in Frankfurt, well, there were two variants. One is I have the Citibank professionals and they come and discuss their view, and then the students can simply ask about, they usually contribute and I did it this and that way, is it also okay? Or I do it sometimes within seminars, and then basically I have no Citibank professional presenting this, and only the students present. And you have, well, you can simply compare your results, and you can basically discuss on why our results so different. It's basically a number of key decisions. What are the peer firms in order to comparison? What are the key multiples that I use? What are the key assumptions for the DCF analysis? And then just by comparing the different approaches on these key things is an interesting exercise to see. You learn how you approach the case and how other people approach the case. And by the way, the investment bankers of Citibank are not professional investment bankers. Well, there are a number of professional investment bankers, but of course they have other duties. Now they usually send an intern, a student. If you start your career in investment banking, you do a 3 or 6 months internship, and in that time you have to do things like this. And then basically you can ask the professionals on how to do it. Of course you have access and you have also more beautiful templates. But in the end, the solution is basically was prepared by a student who is working for 6 months there. And of course I can't bring you this. There were 4 or 5 senior investment bankers. They come to Frankfurt University mainly for recruiting. So they come to my class because they know that the young M&A bankers sit there. And that's why they love to come to the class and talk to my students. And then of course you can ask them all kinds of questions. But to be very honest, valuation is not something that in particular in Vietnam, people usually think, what is the correct answer? And there is no correct answer. After 20 years of experience, you will approach valuation clearly differently from when you are a beginner. But you learn mainly from doing. And you learn, I think you learn a lot just from working in teams and learning effective teamwork there and to learn how the other people basically approach this. Yeah? And of course, you learn a lot by trying out different things. Yeah? ChatGPT will help you a lot. Yeah? There was almost nothing. Corporate finance is a well-defined field. Yeah? If you ask how things work, yeah? If you use the right prompt, yeah? I'm an investment banker, I have to value that company. Yeah? How do I have to treat this kind of accounting number? Yeah? How do I have to treat leases or extraordinary profits or so forth? ChatGPT knows all this. Yeah? The thing is more, what are the more important questions and what are the less important questions? Yeah? You can easily spend weeks on this case. Yeah? And some professionals do this. Yeah? If Continental would be subject to a takeover, yeah, there would be at least 10 or 20 investment bankers all over the world that basically full-time work on this, on only this case. And of course they dig much deeper into this stuff. Yeah? But you get a good flavor of this. Yeah? And therefore, yeah, my students usually love this case, yeah, just because they take away much of it. Yeah? But what you take away of it is to a large part basically how you spend the 3 days over the weekend, yeah, and not on Monday when we discuss the case. Yeah, you still get some additional insights, yeah, but the major part is basically just doing it, yeah, getting the experience. Okay, so bonds is gone. Yeah. Sorry, that was last year's slide. We value here projects and firms, and the project. This is from the textbook, yeah, and then I will add something in which I prepare you for this corporate valuation. Yeah. The valuation by investment bankers basically use this, and then add some more detailed stuff on it. Yeah. So when we think about capital budgeting, we basically value projects. And in order to value a project, yeah, you need to forecast the cash flows, and you need to discount this with the cost of capital. And when you value firms, yeah, or stocks, basically you need to forecast all the cash flows from the whole firm. Yeah? A firm and a project is basically the same. It's just a firm is a bit bigger. And here in the textbook chapter is really quite narrow and small. And on the extra slides that I give you for the corporate valuation, you will see a bit more what practitioners do. So, in chapter 8 of our textbook, where capital budgeting is introduced, it all starts with earnings, simply because in the real world, all the databases are full with earnings. Yeah? The finance professor teaches you, forget the earnings, concentrate on cash flows. Yeah? Yeah? That is very simple. In every financial statement of a firm, yeah, in the annual financial statement, you have a cash flow statement, yeah, and basically you have the cash inflows and the cash outflows. And then you have an income statement, and then you have costs and revenues. Yeah, and if revenues are bigger than cost, then you have the earnings at the end. Yeah? Quite many things are the same. Yeah? So labor cost is a cost and also a cash outflow. Basically copy-paste. Yeah? Many things. Yeah? When you sell something, yeah, it's both a revenue and also a cash inflow. Yeah? But some things are different. Yeah? Do you know what the most important thing is where the cost or a revenue is not a cash flow? In our textbook, it's just really one really things. Yeah? And this is depreciation. Yeah, depreciation is the biggest cost that is not an outflow. Yeah, there was basically nothing here. Yeah, because you buy a machine or you buy a house, yeah, and you have a one-time cash outflow at the beginning, yeah, but there was no cost in here, yeah, when you basically put the cash on the table. Yeah. You only have over the time the depreciation. Yeah. So that's the single most important thing. Yeah, when you think from a finance perspective, yeah, you think about this thing, yeah, and then you have to basically take out the depreciation. Yeah. And corporate managers always start with the earnings statement simply because this is the data that we find. Yeah. We go to a company like Continental as an advisor, as a banker, yeah, and we tell them, please show me your data, yeah, and then want to start a valuation. Yeah. And we need to start here simply because most corporations do not have anything else. Yeah. So, yeah, if I just want to teach students, it would be much easier to start here. Just think about cash inflows and cash outflows, and then do some discounting, and that's it. Yeah? So forecasting earnings, yeah, in particular of new projects, yeah, this is basically what we first do and then find. Yeah? And the capital budget is simply a list of all the projects, yeah, that the company is planning. And initially that has nothing to do with value maximization. Yeah? People just think we want to produce electric battery-powered cars, yeah? So we need a factory for our batteries, and we need a factory for something else. Yeah? And we plan to sell 50% more cars, yeah? So we need a new factory to produce more cars. Yeah? This is all the budget. Yeah? And then the question is, yeah, can we decide to accept them or not? And the finance professor and these famous textbooks on value generation are basically extremely simple. They basically say, yeah, do everything that creates value, full stop. Yeah, the world is very simple. If it's creating value, we do it. If it's destroying value, we don't do it. Yeah? And engineers, unfortunately, have no idea about this. Yeah? They plan for nice factories, yeah? They are modern, they are up to date, yeah? But they are not creating value. Yeah? Engineers love perfection, love beautiful technology. Yeah? Financial guys like profits. Yeah? So if you can produce, yeah, what private equity firms usually do, the first thing that they do is they cut down investment plans. And the engineers basically think, oh, this machine is already 10 years old, we better replace it. Yeah? Maybe it's a bit outdated, the new machines are much nicer, much better. Yeah? Investment bankers say the old machine is still running. Yeah? The value impact, yeah, of the new machine is negative, yeah, so we skip this. So putting power behind those things basically means, yeah, that the engineers no longer have the say. Yeah? Engineers love perfect machines, yeah, and this basically tries to convince people, yeah, that only value is counting. Yeah, and then of course if you think about projects, or what we call capital budgeting, it is always the incremental. Yeah, so my handwriting is a catastrophe. Yeah, where we are today, yeah, and of course you would say what is the value today, and what is tomorrow with and without the investment project. Yeah? Incremental thinking is just, if we say yes or if we say no, yeah, we will have, yeah, what is the impact on the value that we have. Right? And yeah, basically I always think that you have to make a decision. Yeah? Either make the project or don't make it. Yeah? And when you decide yes or no, what is the impact? Yeah? The incremental impact, and that's why we always think about what is the increment. Things that already are in the past can't be affected anymore. Yeah? You have spent last year already 1 million on whatever, an advertising campaign for some planning. Yeah? It will not affect the future. Yeah? If I say yes or no, that's already dead. Yeah? So we can ignore it completely. Yeah? This is something that engineers usually don't understand. Yeah? They say, but it belongs to the project. Yeah? We did this already in the past in order to do the project. Yeah? It's a part of the project. Yeah? It's not a part of the decision. Yeah? When we say yes and no, it will not change anything. Yeah? So always keep in mind this incremental kind of aspect. And this is a workout example, and the first case that I just put on the platform is very similar to this. Yeah? So this evening, please have a look at the case. You don't have to solve it completely if you don't like, or if you don't have the time, but you should find the same kind of things again. Yeah? So Cisco, a large producer of hardware for the internet, they spent 300,000 on a feasibility study just in order to get the data. And say, look, at HomeNet, maybe a new type of router or whatever. And assume that this project is for 4 years, and you plan to have 100,000 units that you sell for 260. So these are Wi-Fi routers for home in this example. And if you do the exercise, if you do this project, of course, you have to develop the new hardware, and that would cost 50 million in terms of R&D. So you need your engineers to basically design this whole thing, and you need a machine to produce these new hardware, and that costs 7.5 million. And equipment lives for 5 years. 4 years is the project, so you have to think about what to do with the machines in the last year. And of course, we assume that nothing else can be produced on these machines. Then this machine must be housed somewhere, and the assumption is you have a lab that is basically a factory. Everything that needs to be produced must have a machine, and that machine must stand in some factory. So the factory is already there. And your overhead is basically all the corporate HR functions of Cisco. That could be marketing costs, that could be the finance and accounting department, that is the general management of the whole thing. And here in practice, it could be that if you say yes or no, the overhead doesn't change. You have only one boss, the chief executive officer. His costs are somehow allocated to all the projects, but he is not becoming more costly or less costly if you do the project. So there was a good reason to treat this as a fixed cost. I think in this case, let's see, it is nonetheless treated as a variable cost. But this is always, and then your production costs. Let's say 110. So clearly, if you just compare the unit price and the production cost, if you produce a lot of them, this is clearly worthwhile. Now, the investment into the machine, 7.5 million, is a cash outflow here, 7.5 million, but it comes in the income statement via depreciation. And if the machine lasts for 5 years, you would have 1.5 million per year in depreciation in the income statement. So this is how we will see this. By the way, this upfront R&D cost of 50 million, in this case is assumed not to be an asset, not to be depreciated. In the United States at least, you can also basically create an asset called R&D, and then you have amortization instead of depreciation. Amortization is the same thing. Amortization is depreciation of non-tangible assets. Yeah, but here in this case, we simply assume, as we do in most countries outside the US, that this does not become an asset. So it's basically it's a cost that we would have as an R&D cost in the first year. Then you just pay, you hire and pay the engineers. Yeah, and then one of the key questions in finance is of course financing costs. And the textbook now says interest expenses are typically not included, or typically they are always not included. Here in the income statement, we of course have an interest rate costs. Every corporation has some bank loans, and you see the interest payments here. If you look at the cash flow statement, of course, also equity costs something. You have dividends paid out. Dividends are a cash outflow. And dividends and interest on loans is of course equivalent. It is what you pay on equity and what you pay on debt. It's not included simply because if you think about what finance is, the value of a cash flow in the future is of course the discounted value of the future cash flow. And this discounting, this is basically the cost of finance in the capital market theory. Just by discounting this cash flow, we basically reduce. Value V is much smaller than the cash flow, and the discounting is basically accounting for the cost of finance. And when the cash flow is risky, then we do not only use the safe interest rate, but we also use the risk premium in order to account for the riskiness. We say that risky cash flows are more expensive in terms of cost of capital. So with RDCF valuation, by definition, the cost of capital is not in the cash flows, it's in the denominator of our valuation function. And this sentence here is a bit awkward. I don't like this at all. The rationale is that the project should be judged on its own, not on how it will be financed. That's not the case. The case is that the cash flow doesn't need any financing costs, it's simply because the cost of capital is here. So basically, this is the core insight of the capital market theory. Practitioners usually say, oh, I have a cheap loan for this machine, and then this machine becomes basically more attractive in the earnings figures. But finance basically tells you, if this machine is highly risky, and if I charge a high risk premium, it will become less attractive. Or an engineer may say, I have a lot of equity and I only need a small amount of debt. And therefore, from an earnings perspective, this machine looks very attractive. But the financing guy says, the complete value must be financed. I discount everything with the cost of capital. So both equity and debt, 100% must be financed. And therefore, how it will be financed does not play any role here. It's really interesting, because it is counterintuitive. We usually think, we buy a house, it's for us a risky investment if we can obtain a cheap loan from the bank, and otherwise we don't do it. In capital budgeting, we are told invest if this is value generating, and if it's value generating if all the investment, if everything that you get in the future is counted at an appropriate interest rate, that is basically creating value. So the assumption is the theory yeah, cap M, that gives you the risk premium. Yeah, theory is better to give you the cost of capital, yeah, than your own calculation that you do in a bank where you have yeah, some where you pretty often leave out many things like equity costs. Yeah? But by the way, there was basically another this is the value generation formula that you learn in the textbooks. Yeah? Basically, you look at net present value. Yeah? After all the investments is the present value of this discounted cash flow formula positive. Yeah? But there was another formula that is usually, well, some private equity funds actually apply this. Yeah? You basically look at your, whatever you call profit, and then you simply subtract the cost of all capital in dollars. Yeah? Of course, you have to make sure that all capital is included. If you do it like this, it works as well. Yeah, there is nothing wrong with this or this approach. Yeah. The textbook approach is this approach, the DCF valuation formula. Yeah, but if you want to include the cost of capital, of course you can simply change the formula if you like and calculate it differently. Okay, so all financing costs are basically out of our picture. Yeah, they are only indirectly introduced in the denominator. Taxes are important. Taxes are both, of course, a cost and also a cash outflow, and therefore are important. Now, the interesting thing is that this is not the income tax that we pay. This is earnings before interest and taxes. But of course, you pay taxes. So, what does the fiscal authority look at when they charge taxes? They look at the earnings after, interest payments, yeah, and then multiply this with the tax rate. Yeah? If you prepare your tax statement, yeah, of course you are allowed to deduct your interest payment as a tax, as a cost, yeah, and only the resulting earnings after interest is taxable. Yeah? Here, we basically when we calculate that we tax the earnings before interest and taxes, we actually do a little we do a simplification, and then actually we have this income tax is not the expected value of the cash outflows to the fiscal authorities, but the error is made up in the denominator. I will show you later on in more advanced slides. The textbook is actually silent on this. But please just keep in mind, this is not the income tax that you are going to pay. This is the income tax, how it is calculated according to the standard textbook formula. And you can only believe at this point of time that the textbook is not wrong. It is not the correct income tax to be paid, but nonetheless you can use this approach for valuation, simply because the error is corrected later. Basically, here in the cost of capital, we will basically correct for the error. if we, yeah, depending on how much debt we use, yeah, we have here too much income tax planned, yeah, and we will make up for this in the cost of capital. Okay, so our calculation for the net income that is left over to be paid out is basically earnings before interest and taxes times this after those taxes, and of course EBIT is defined as revenues minus costs minus depreciation. So that is one reason why you will see in a minute that depreciation here is a cost but not a cash flow, and therefore we have to write it out somehow, but it will not be wiped out completely, simply because depreciation also affects the tax payment. If you have more depreciation, you pay less taxes. So let's now for this case basically see how the standard approach to analyzing this case looks like. Sales, 100,000 units times the price of 260, that gives you 26 million, by assumption for 4 years. This is our revenues. Revenues and sales is the same. The cost of goods sold, 110 per unit times 100,000 for 4 years. That's also clear. So the gross profit is simply the direct profit from selling and producing is 50 million every year. Now here we assume, where was it actually? Your annual overhead of 2.8 million. We assume this is directly related to the project. If we say yes to the project, we have to pay this because we need some people to do this. And then it comes up here as the next cost item. And then of course we have to pay the 50 million in order to do the upfront research. And this is basically a cost. This is earnings forecast. So we only think in the dimension of costs and revenues from the earnings statement, from the corporate earnings statement. So in the corporate earnings statement, you will have a minus 15 million in the first year. Depreciation of the machine will reduce for 5 years our income statement. And this altogether brings us to earnings before interest and taxes. We have everything included except taxes and except interest rates. And that is the typical approach how investment bankers do this, and also how earnings statements today are prepared for the shareholders. And you just sum it up and it's this kind of stream. Now, if you pay an income tax of 20% on this, then this would be the tax. And see, here's a positive tax inflow, which is another assumption that we may find critical, simply because if the overall company says I made a loss, you don't get money from the government. All you can do is a tax loss carry forward, and you can basically use this loss in later years to reduce your tax bill, but you don't receive it back immediately. But here we talk about one small project of a large company like Cisco. And Cisco has a lot of profit, and so if they reduce their profit with this 50 billion, they will effectively reduce the interest payment with 3,000. So if you say yes to the project, basically it means that you get 3,000 more. If this would be a complete fraud, then you would say, no, this 3,000 comes here and here. You have a tax loss carry forward. But the most important thing is you really assume full taxes on EBIT. And this is basically, and simply because the real tax payment is after the interest rate, this is an acceleration. Under no way you will pay so much taxes, because you always have some interest payment to be reduced there. And you know that basically this is not an unbiased estimate, it's just what our textbook tells us on how to calculate this. And you have to trust me at the moment that by correcting this into the weighted cost of capital formula, this error basically is undone, and therefore it is doable and theoretically sound way to do it. And then you have unlevered net income. And that's where we start. Every project evaluator, every capital budgeting expert would calculate this unlevered net income, because he is interested in the view that it's finance neutral, before any debt or equity has been used. The textbook always tells you, just believe for a moment, disregard debt altogether, and think that this is 100% equity financed. If you do this assumption, then of course this would be the real world outcome. If you use debt, then it's not the real world outcome. It's slightly wrong, but still what we do. Okay, there are some things that we have been a bit sloppy yet. One is the equipment will be housed in an existing land. That means that we use a factory that we already have. And of course this factory could also be used for something else. Opportunity cost is if we say yes to the project, what are basically the consequences of this? And if one consequence is, if we say yes, then we cannot rent out this factory to somebody else. It is an open, unused space at the moment. If we use it ourselves, then of course we don't have to pay for it, it's already there. But if we don't use it, we could pay it up. We can rent it out to some other corporation and we would get some rental income. In that case, this rental income should be added basically to the no decision. It should be accounted for. And therefore, in this example, they assume that it could be rented out for 200,000. And if you say yes, basically that means that you have to pay this 200,000 or that you have 200,000 less in income in this area. So, this would be taxed, of course. If we rent this out, we receive only 160,000, the after-tax example. And we basically say this is related to the yes/no decision. If we say yes to the project, this money is not flowing, and therefore this is relevant, and we have to include it in our calculation. And then, quite typical, there was another kind of externality of the project. If we produce this one, we may sell less of other routers. If this is a Wi-Fi router of a special kind, then this is maybe a high value, very good high Wi-Fi router, and the people that buy this new Wi-Fi router will not buy the old simple Wi-Fi router anymore. And we call this cannibalization, or simple externality. So in this example, somebody estimated that 25% of sales come from customer who would have purchased an existing Cisco wireless router if HomeNet were not available. And then of course this 25% is a reduction of existing sales and a negative impact on the existing corporation. So suppose the old devices sell for 100, then you have an expected loss of sales of 2.5 million, 25% of this. And suppose the cost is 60, so the profit margin is much lower. Basically what you lose is, then 25 times 60 is 1.5 million cost. Yeah? And then by saying yes to the project, you basically say, I have this less in revenues, but I also have this less in costs. Yeah? And in the last spreadsheet, yeah, you will see that these kind of externalities are included, simply because the sales are now 23.5, and they used to be 26. Yeah? So they have been reduced by 2.5, yeah, by this amount. Yeah? And the same thing is the costs. They also have been reduced from 11 to 9.5. Yeah? So basically, yeah, we're strictly saying from the viewpoint of here, yeah, if we are today and if we say yes, yeah, what is the impact on our, yeah, here it's only on earnings. Yeah? We carefully look at all the impacts, and we call this incremental earnings. Yeah? Incremental is always, yeah, if we say yes to the project, this comes on top. Yeah? And on top can be positive or negative. Yeah, the rest is as before, and then now we have this unlevered net income effect. So basically at this point of time we say, if we say yes to the project, yeah, this will be the impact on net income. And now in the last step, we have to turn this into something that we can value. Yeah, net income is nothing that we will put in the DCF formula. In order to value something, we have to translate this into cash flows. So let's see how the last step basically, yeah, first you forecast earnings, yeah, and you are careful to basically say, if I say yes, yeah, this will be the incremental impact. And then you have your perfect earnings forecast with everything, yeah, with opportunity costs and externalities and so forth. Yeah, and the next step is then to translate this into cash flows, okay, from earnings to cash flows. Yeah, but there was still one slide before this cash flow. Let's see what's on there. So, one thing that you may have already forgotten is, at the beginning it was said 300,000 have already been spent. Yeah, they do not appear at all in the calculation. Yeah, I would say in most firms they would appear, yeah, but it's already paid. Yeah? So if we say yes today, this is not any incremental impact. Yeah? That's what we call sunk costs. Yeah? We have spent it, yeah? And whatever we do now, yeah, the money is gone, full stop. Yeah? The incremental value of saying yes or no to the project, yeah, is not affected by this. Yeah? So we can simply ignore it. Yeah? Suppose we have spent 3 million on this, yeah? Then of course the whole project would never be profitable, yeah? Because the cost was so extraordinary. Yeah? But if the future is still profitable, yeah, we would still say yes to the project. Yeah? The overall would then be a loss, yeah? But we did the loss in the past, yeah, by spending 3 million. Yeah? And in the future we will basically reduce the cost, yeah, by doing the exercise. Yeah? So incremental thinking means, yeah, if you have to decide, yeah, you are only interested in the consequences of your decision. Yeah? Say yes or say no. Yeah? And this is in the past, so by definition, it is a sunk cost and not relevant for our decision. Yeah? So just forget it. Very typical error that many practitioners do, yeah? But also many students in the exam. It is very clear why this is so. Yeah, the overhead costs, quite often overhead costs are fixed and not incremental. In our example, we assume them to be incremental. Yes, they are included. Yeah, so in our example, we basically assume, yeah, that we need to hire one more in the marketing staff or one more in the finance and accounting department. Yeah? I think the more honest way would be to say, yeah, the current team in the overhead department, yeah, in the corporate headquarters, yeah, will be able to also include this project. And then there were hot debates basically within the companies. The headquarter always says, yeah, I charge all the projects internally with some costs. It's just an internal cost. The corporate headquarter is of course just a loss-making entity. The headquarter costs a lot of money, it doesn't sell anything, it doesn't create anything. And then there's always a big debate whether these kinds of projects must basically pay 2.8 million and only realize if they can afford to do this 2.8 million. As an economist, you would say the only important question is whether it's incremental or not. If Elon Musk is simply thinking, he adds the new Tesla robo-taxi, for example. A small car, basically, where he says, I don't need to hire new marketing experts or new management board. The direct effect of this new car is basically only the direct production cost. I would guess that Elon Musk would not include the 2.8 million. But on the other hand, if you grow and make more and more cars, of course, sooner or later you have to add new headquarter people. And then there was also an argument, of course, to charge the project some headquarter because there was no free capacity. Only if you really believe that there was free capacity in the headquarter. The management team, there was only one management team. It may, and it will not become more costly if you add a project. But the amount of staff that you need for HR or for marketing, then of course is a function of your quality. Okay, so if R&D costs had already been spent, I actually don't remember correctly. Was it already spent or not? I think only the 200,000. Once the money has been spent, it is completely irrelevant. Sunk costs are never relevant. The decision to continue or abandon should be based only on the incremental costs and benefits of the project. Okay, and now let me show you first. This is where we were. This is just a repetition. And all you have to do now is to come from income to free cash flow. And here in this example, it is really only the depreciation that is corrected for. If you ask ChatGPT, please give me a long list of everything that is a cost or a revenue item, but not a cash inflow or outflow, you will see depreciation is the most important, but at least 100 additional tiny things. The textbook basically says all these others are so unimportant that we simply don't care. We just assume that the net effect is zero. And in almost all circumstances, this is also okay from a practical viewpoint. But if you want to be precise, if you really plan for an M&A transaction and you have lots of experts working for months on this, of course you have much more detail. This is a very, very strong simplification. There is just one item at depreciation that is in the cost but not in the cash flow. So you basically add this back. This is not cash. You add it back. But you add it back here. If you would wipe it out here, then the tax would be affected. You don't want to affect. You need it twice in, simply because you don't want to disturb the tax flow. So just leaving it out from the very beginning is not an option. You have to add it back because you say these are all cash outflows except this. If I add back this 1.5, then I get the real cash. And of course, the capital expenditure here at the beginning has to be added. And but this 50 million is, of course, the textbook. It's amazing. This is such a famous textbook. It basically tells you here, R&D is a sunk cost and therefore irrelevant. But in the case here, the R&D has not been spent. In this case, only the 300,000 has been spent. This is sunk. But the 50 million is not. Yeah, and you see, even the most famous textbooks are at least a bit inconclusive. Yeah, of course, in the end, nothing is completely wrong, but it's at least a bit misleading if you read this slide. Okay, so basically, all you do is you turn this depreciation line into a cash flow line. And the cash flow is minus 7.5 million upfront, nothing else. Yeah, and then there was one more thing. Increases in net working capital. I hope you know what it stands for. By the way, if you don't know abbreviations, just say, I read a finance textbook and it tells me NYWC, what is it standing for? If you just ask for NWC, it gives you at least 10 different abbreviations. Yeah? But if you say this comes from financial accounting, ChatGPT, of course, knows everything precisely. So we only have to understand why we need this net working capital still. And then we have the so-called free cash flow. And free, isn't it? This is basically the cash flow stream of the project. If we say yes, yeah, then this will be the impact. Yeah? Cisco is a large company with lots of cash flows. Yeah? This is what we add or subtract if we say yes to the project. Yeah? And so we have to pay this, yeah, and we get this. Yeah? Why is this called free cash flow? For very strange reasons. Yeah? Because in the 70s, somebody invented this nice word, and free means, in this circumstance, actually the professors that developed this basically said, this is what you can take out of the company and pay it out as a dividend. So it's free to be paid out as a dividend. Yeah, it's not needed anywhere else. Yeah? If you think this is a firm, yeah, this complete project is a standalone firm, yeah, you buy the firm for 19.5 million, yeah, so you basically put it on the earth, yeah, and then this is what comes out, and you can basically consume it and take it out of the firm. Yeah? Free to be consumed or taken out. Okay, so here we have depreciation, and the counterbalancing thing here is capital expenditure. Sorry, it's usually capital F. With many abbreviations. Yeah. Capital expenditure is this 7.5. And if you look on the balance sheet, basically you see fixed assets or long-term assets, and you see working capital, which is basically short-term assets. And here you see equity and debt. When you think about where to invest, always remember, when you grow the firm, you need two kinds of assets. You need the machines and the factories, but you also need working capital that's typically inventory. If you want to produce routers, you have to order some supplies, and you have storage of these supplies, and net working capital is also some other financial things. But if you just think about short-term capital, meaning inventories, then whatever you do, you have to add some inventory, and this will also be a cash flow. Let's see how the textbook is doing this. The textbook says net working capital is defined as current assets minus current liabilities. Current is just another word for short term. So everything that is not standing there for 5 years or more. And it has this inventory, as I said, but it also has other things. It has also cash and receivables and payables. Here on the right-hand side, some of the debt is called payable. That is for people, payables is not debt. Yeah, simply because a payable is if you order something and you have to pay in 3 months. Yeah, it's a kind of financing, yeah, but you don't pay interest on it, like on debt. And practitioners basically say this is how this is what we call the capital structure, working equity. This is what I have to pay interest for. This is what I have to pay a risk premium for. Yeah, this is not debt because it's not costly and there is no cost of capital, and therefore I basically put it in here, yeah, and put it into an asset basically. Yeah, investment bankers sometimes treat the balance sheet as this would not exist. Yeah, they only take net working capital, yeah, and basically that wipes this out. Yeah, it's a nice trick to basically make the system working. Yeah, so yeah. So if you do a project, you have to think about whether you need to grow your net working capital. So you need to estimate the impact on this or. Yeah. And by the way, this definition is just an accounting definition. If you ask financial accountants, what is working capital or net working capital, they will basically tell you this definition. Yeah. So in our case, they make a very simple assumption. They basically say receivables are 50% of sales and payables are 50% of cost of goods sold and inventory is 0. Yeah. You need to plan something. Of course, this is just a stupid, silly exercise. Yeah? You could also say, I need some inventories, and they are X% of sales. You need to plan all four, yeah? Cash and inventory, and receivables and payables. And yeah, planning as a percentage of sales is quite often the standard. Yeah, and the net effect is 2,100 every year. Yeah. So this is basically, if you say yes to the project, this must also be financed. And it's a bit surprising, right? You would understand if I need to create an inventory, it is intuitively clear that I have to pay for this. Yeah? But if I receive 50% of my sales later, yeah, so people get the router, but they pay only 1 year later, or if I pay my inventories later, yeah, then this also basically creates a net working capital need, yeah, simply because although it's both 50%, sorry, this is of cost of goods sold. 50% of the costs. Basically, 50% of all bills are paid late. Yeah, but these bills are of course much bigger because they are sales, and these costs are much lower, and so the net effect, of course, is negative. So let's look at the end result. No, look at the end result. Yeah. The end result is 1,100. 2,100 must be invested in the first year, and in the fifth year it says free again, yeah, because this inventory or these receivables do no longer exist. Yeah, so it's a one-time jump up and jump down. Yeah, again, a typical error is that you put a 2,100 in each of these cells. That's simply because if you look at this, it looks as if you need 2,100 in working capital every year. Yeah? But think of that this is your balance sheet, and as long as this stays constant, there is no investment need. Only if you need a new machine, a new factory, or a new inventory, yeah? Then this is the change. Yeah? So capital expenditures is the change of the long-term assets. And the change of net working capital is only the change. Yeah? So here you go from 0 to 2,100. Here you have a change, here you have no change, and here you have a change to 0. Yeah, down to 2,100. Yeah, so remember, it is the change in the net working capital, yeah, that you need for the cash flow, yeah, and not the working capital itself. So that's why yeah, we have it only twice in here. Okay, and this is basically just a repetition of the calculation that we did. Yeah? If you go through this thing and think what you calculated, then you calculate the income tax on EBIT, and EBIT had basically all these three things in here. And then you add depreciation. So let's do this in the formula. You have the unlevered net income. Unlevered because this is the income of an unlevered firm. Yeah, we say we don't look at financing at all yet. And there is no interest payment. Yeah? Unlevered always means without any interest payment. Yeah? And unlevered is just a reminder for us. Yeah? We just consider before financing, yeah? and that is the same thing as if we think about an unlevered firm. Yeah? Cisco is of course not an unlevered firm. Yeah? And if we calculate the unlevered cash flow, this is not Cisco cash flow that we calculate. Yeah? So we calculate the unlevered net income before, and here is after tax, and then we add depreciation, and we add the changes of the long-term capital, and we add the change of the short-term capital. Yeah? And if we just simplify, depreciation is of course twice in there, and the net effect is tax rate times depreciation. So we can simply say revenues minus costs, and after tax, but these two things and these two depreciation forms is basically left over. And this thing here is a very famous thing. It's a famous depreciation tax shield. Investment bankers usually talk about tax shields and treat them as assets, and all the engineers basically become very silent because they have no clue about this. It's a kind of finance jargon that basically leaves out all the people that did not study finance. If you want to be important, you should know some words where the other people actually become silent, and then you say, oh, you want this strategy, but you did not think about the impact on the tax shield. And then the people say, oh, sorry, I'm so stupid. Please, finance guy, you do the decisions. That is actually a very simple thing. It's just one thing that is left over in the cash flow statement. And it basically comes from the more depreciation you have, the more taxes you save. So depreciation is actually something good. And if you compare two projects, they're both everything the same, just depreciation is different, then you will still have more value and more cash flows. You know that depreciation is not a cash flow, but depreciation helps you to save taxes. And tax savings is a cash flow. So depreciation is both not to be included, because it's not a cash flow, but at the same time it is included in the form of the depreciation tax shield, because it helps us to save taxes. Okay, and then the rest is valuation. Here we simply assume that 12% is the cost of capital. And of course only a data chapters will explain this. This is the interest rate plus any kind of risk premium. But if we simply calculate the discounted value of this cash flow stream, we have included our upfront investment, and that's why we call it net present value. And when we leave this out, then we would call it a present value. It's just a kind of convention, that whenever you say net, it is including the upfront payment that you do. Yeah, and the net present value is 7,622. And actually, the only question that is interesting is it positive or is it negative? Because if it's positive and only $1, it is value creating. The only question is, what sign does it have? And if you buy a book on value generation by Rappaport, by Damodaran, that are made for managers, that are much more management language jargon, but this is the end, the essence at the end. You want to base your decisions only on the valuation effect, and if you believe the model is correct, of course you may say, oh, there were bad assumptions, wrong assumptions. You may have recognized, we calculate, we assume an unlevered firm, which is clearly a wrong assumption given that Cisco is a levered firm, and you may say, no, I don't believe this model, I believe it's wrong. Then you will say, okay, I don't use this theory. But if you're convinced that this theory is correct, and believe me, many people believe so, this is not an error that we make. We can do this with this model. Then we say, okay, 7,600 is the value added by this project. And so summing up, if you think back what we did, we actually started with an income. We looked at the income statement and tried our best to do an incremental impact estimation. And we said here we also have to think about the lost revenues in other products, externalities are used, and here in the we included this opportunity cost, the factory cannot be rented out, so we really tried hard to find the incremental impact. And this basically, last line is the most important impact. This is our incremental impact on the income statement. And then we basically said, now we have to turn this into cash flows, and we use this screen here, and we turn it into cash flows by adding back depreciation, by adding the capital expenditure, and they are basically partners, and then we also think about changes in net working capital, and then we have the free cash flow. And the last thing is then simply to put this in a discounted cash flow formula. So if we assume 12% is my cost of capital, for whatever reasons, you should be very, it's clear that if you change this number, that may change easily everything. 12% is probably including a risk premium, and one of the key questions is then, do we apply the correct risk premium for this project? Maybe this project is highly risky, it should have a higher interest rate, or it's rather less risky, and then we should reduce this. It should be clearly, well, if we decide today, and one thing is clear, it should be today's safe interest rate plus the risk premium. Many people look into the past and say, 5 years ago, we took a bank loan, and we currently pay 10% on this bank loan. This is irrelevant from a capital market perspective, simply because we say, if you ask the capital market now, how do you value this project? And then the capital market will look at today's interest rate. It's like if you ask a bank today, well, what is a bank loan costing? They will also look at today's interest rates. So valuation, from the viewpoint of the capital market, is basically always thinking about valuation from the, well, let's think, of course, we have it in our heads. Our belief is that the investors in the stock market take this kind of modeling approach in order to find the values of stocks. Yeah? And the same thing also for bonds. Yeah? Bonds that have lower risk premium, yeah? But in the end, all fixed income instruments are also believed to have that price. Yeah? If you see a government bond price of maybe 110, yeah, of course you have no idea what kind of model is behind it. Yeah? But simply by observing that the model works almost perfectly for government bonds, yeah? You just need the today's interest rate, yeah? Plug it in here, or plug it in here. Well, this looks almost like a government bond. Actually, it's cash flow. Yeah? If you take the government bond interest rate, then you find the price of the government bonds today. Yeah? So for bonds, this formula works really good. Yeah? But and for stocks, we don't know. Yeah? It is the theory in our head, yeah? That we believe, yeah, the capital market will love this project if we do it like this and convince the stock market that we did it correctly. Now suppose Elon Musk is basically just investing a lot of money into this robo-taxi whatever factory, a bigger project, and then he claims, and guys, yeah, please expect a net present value of 7.6, whatever. Then of course the ultimate question is, do we believe him or do we don't believe him? Yeah? And Elon Musk is a role model for somebody that loves to promise more than he can keep. Yeah? Elon Musk is notoriously optimistic, over-optimistic, yeah? and of course many people that work in the budgeting department of firms are over-optimistic. Yeah? If somebody wants to produce this nice this nice hardware, yeah, he will of course forecast optimistically. Yeah? And if you are the corporate treasurer or the CEO or you're the shareholder, and then of course you know that you should be a bit more pessimistic. Yeah? That management forecasts are usually biased. Yeah? So it doesn't surprise anybody, at least in academics, yeah, when somebody announces a big investment project and tells the market, I did all my calculation, yeah, I used the textbook, I did all the math, yeah, and the result is net value is added. And on the same day of the announcement, the stock price goes down. Yeah, simply because the stock market does not believe, yeah, that the costs are so low, the revenues are so high, yeah, the amount of units sold is so high. Yeah, so, yeah, but that's not a criticism on the model. Yeah? It's simply a criticism of the inputs of the model. Yeah? If you want to understand capital market reactions, yeah, why does some announcements drive the stock price up and other announcements drive it down? Yeah? Then if you just take into, if you just recognize, yeah, that stockholders always believe that managers are too optimistic. Yeah, because they are paid for higher stock prices. Yeah? They do everything to talk the stock price up. Yeah? And naturally, they must be too optimistic. And so, stock market prices go up only if, yeah, for some reasons or the other, there is no over-optimism in the data, yeah, and the stock market has reason to believe this, yeah, or if the numbers are just so big that even after discounting for over-optimism, there is still value added. But very often you have big investment announcements and the stock market price goes down on the day. Yeah? Simply because many stock market participants are very, very skeptical and they actually believe that at least a high number of managers still today have wrong incentives, yeah? Because they want to have the most modern factory, the most beautiful car, the biggest company whatsoever. Yeah? The end result is always too much investment. And when private equity firms take over firms, yeah, the first where they virtually cut with an axe is capital budgets. Yeah? Like Elon Musk is firing 90% of the people, Elon Musk probably also killed 90% of all R&D projects or investment projects that Twitter had. Yeah, simply because private equity deeply believes that that many of these projects basically are only good on the numbers, only good on paper, yeah, but not in reality. Okay, you're still awake? I have a bad habit, and that is that I usually talk non-stop. and you deserve some break time. But today we had no morning session, so maybe we can continue. At least you still look very, very good. Sometimes I see into my students' eyes and I say, oh God, what did I do? It's standing in front here is actually much more, you are more tired afterwards, but while you're talking, you are under adrenaline. Okay, so let's now quickly go to the second, at least the first part of the second chapter. Valuing stocks is basically in the end the same thing. The end result will be very much like the value of a project is the present value of future cash flows. So is the stock the present value of the future cash flows. And the cash flow that the stockholder receives is of course P1. So if you pay today's stock price, and you think about what do you get in 1 year from now, if you would simply sell the stock for the stock price then you get the cash flow of dividend 1 plus P1. And of course nobody knows P1, the future stock price, but if you have an estimate of the future stock price, you can basically interpret today's price as the discounted value. And in retrospect, of course, you can always say, okay, 1 year later the price was this, the dividend was this, and then you can calculate the realized return on equity by using this formula. So with P1 being the expected stock price, wherever this comes from any theory, and then this is the expected return on equity. And if it is the realized stock price 1 year later, then this is the realized return on equity. Return on equity clearly has two sources. You make money from dividends and from stock price increases. And when you ask shareholders, how do you make money? Then they will say, I expect to make 3% on dividends and another 3% on capital gains. That gives us completely 6%. So this thinking can there are two sources of income, capital gains and dividends. This is deeply rooted in the heads of professional investors. And then of course P1. Okay, let's make this division. If you basically separate this into two things, then you can say that the return on equity is simply the dividend return, dividend divided by the current stock price, plus capital gains divided by the stock price. And if you just buy the S&P 500 stock portfolio, then the dividend income is rather safe. I think on average, Standard & Poor's stocks pay out 3 or 4% in dividend. And the rest is of course capital gains. Now, of course, P1 is the same function of P2, and P2 is the same function of P3, and you can easily, so you are all good in mathematics, if you just do this formula repeatedly, of course the price becomes the cash flow of all the dividends in the future, and if this here goes to infinity, and then basically it is going to zero. The stock listed corporation is like a bond without maturity date. There are also perpetual bonds, and if you value them, you will realize that actually everything beyond 50 years in the future has no measurable impact. It's so far away, and that all the discounting basically reduces this to zero. So even if this goes to infinite, practically only the first X years, maybe 20, 30, or even 50, they effectively count. And it's all dividend. And this is the dividend discount model. And it basically says shareholders are like bondholders using the discounted cash flow model to value the stocks. If you observe the stock price of Amazon of being 250 whatsoever, then the only reason is that there is some expectation of the future dividends and there is some discount rate. And this is then basically the cost of equity. This is what the textbooks basically interpret as the cost of equity. When you value bonds, you say this is the appropriate discount rate for government bonds. We take the government bond yield curve. Here basically you say the shareholders had to finance this. You can either say they expect to make 10%, or you can say the equity costs 10%. And that's what we put in. If you know the dividends, of course, which is ridiculous, nobody knows these dividends, then you can solve for the cost of equity. And there was huge literature that basically not tries to forecast the dividends, but at least tries to explain whether these price changes that we see mainly come from dividend changes or from cost of equity changes. If you think about why does the stock price go up and down, it can go up and down if the perception by the market of future dividends change. So this is when Mr. Trump comes and says, I do everything for the economy and I try to boost the profits, I will reduce the taxes, then of course people expect higher dividends in the future. But if you think about in the year 2008, the financial crisis, the stock prices went down by 50%, and it is hard to believe that the dividends actually went down by 50%. Maybe people become extremely pessimistic. Dividend estimation is of course driven by optimism and by pessimism, but there was a large literature that basically says, and this is called excess volatility literature, that this cost of equity is actually going up and down. And what seems to be the case is that the risk premium demanded by the market, this seems to go up and down. So there were years when people are in panic and in shock and they're very frightened and they say, I prefer safe investments. And therefore I only buy stocks when they are really cheap, when they are very interesting and displeasing. And in other years, when the world is too optimistic, like in the dot-com bubble, maybe today in the AI bubble, people basically think that everything in the future looks very gloomy and very nice. The way that investment bankers do the valuation of our sample firm Continental is basically the same thing. It's just that they replace the dividend by the free cash flow to the firm. Before we said, so suppose this is a whole firm, not just a project. So you establish the firm for this cost, and these are then the cash flows that you can get out of the firm. This and the dividend formula is basically the same. And the discount rate here is also almost the same. Here you have the complete firm, as the unlevered firm, with the dividend discount model. You have the levered firm. So think basically, the dividend discount model looks only at the cash flows that go to equity. And the free cash flow to firm model basically looks at the assets, yeah, before any financing. Yeah, this is what we did here. Yeah. We basically bought some assets, yeah, and then these cash flows were before looking at any financing. Yeah. They were called unlevered because we didn't even recognize anything. Yeah. Implicitly we assumed an all equity firm. Yeah, so this is the one difference, and therefore the 12% here. But the overall firm is of course less risky than the equity. Yeah, leverage has the leverage effect. I hope you must expect this was done. And the debt increases the equity. So suppose assets go up by 1. This is 100. This is 50. This is 50. Yeah, then we have EA over A equal to 1%. Yeah, with a 1% increase in the assets. Yeah, and that translates, of course, in a 50 to 51 divided by 50 to 2% increase of the equity. Yeah, so the presence of debt simply means that a 1% gain translates into 2% gain from the equity, and of course, if you have a minus, the risk is of course also the same. Yeah, so this really simple model immediately shows you whether the leverage is increasing the risk. Yeah? You still have only $1 gain. Yeah? If I add $1 here, and if my bank doesn't receive more money, yeah, then of course I make this $1 more. Yeah? But for the assets it's just 1%, and for the equity holders it is 2%. Yeah? So that's what we call the leverage effect. Yeah? And where we can easily see that equity is much more risky than the unlevered firm. Yeah? And for this reason, this is the unlevered firm as a relatively low risk premium. Yeah? And with the equity model, here in the discounted dividend model, we have the cost of equity, or the expected return on equity, I already bought it, yeah? And this is different from the cost of overall capital. And intuitively, you just think that equity is financed only with equity and equity is risky. The whole firm is financed with partly equity and partly debt. Yeah? Some is risky, some is less risky. Yeah? And the average capital cost is then, of course, something like the weighted average cost of capital, which we will see in the next chapter, basically looks at this. And so risk being the most, when we say capital markets, is talking about risk and return. Yeah, which return is what cash flows we will have, basically, yeah, and risk is what is the discount rate that we apply to it. And more risk will require a higher discount rate. Yeah, capital markets are risk averse, and therefore the model is the same, yeah, but the risk premium will be another one. I think this example is so simple, we just quickly go through it. Yeah? So there was a share trading at 70 and it pays a dividend of 1.6. And if you can have 8.5% with similar risky investments, how much would you pay? And of course you would say, okay, actually expected stock price is 70, if this is the discount rate, then this is today's stock price. But rather trivial. And 4.1 cents is the capital gains, so 6.08. Dividend rate income is 2.42, and 2.42 and 6.08 must of course add to the cost of capital. Basically, the idea is the risk of the company dictates the cost of capital, and the stock price today is a function of this cost of capital plus, of course, the more dividend you pay here, the less you need in the future. But the model is unsatisfying, of course, because it requires the future stock price as an input. And therefore, it's a rather pedagogical tool, but not really a tool that you use for valuation. If you use it for valuation, you use it like this. And I would say when I was young, there was still the textbooks were full of these models, and basically said this is how we value firms. We want to know the true value of Wincare. Then all we need to do is a good forecast of the dividends of the future, very long term, and then discount this at this rate. This is completely gone, simply because this kind of approach can replace this. We calculate basically, we look here at the assets before financing and look at the cash flows that they produce. And what we then call free cash flow, the same thing that you saw for the project, is then interpreted as this could be paid out as a dividend to an unlevered firm, or to all the investors. However you finance this, the machines basically generate money. Think about the cash flows generated are like a pie, or a cake. And the equity and the debt holders basically get to eat this cake. And the only question is, how do they split it up? The debt holders say the first $5 to me and the rest is for you. But the size of the cake, or of the pie, that is what dictates the value. And therefore, we want to understand the cash flows that come out of here. And we want then to discount them with an interest rate that is appropriate for the whole firm. That is a kind of mix of debt and equity, and not only equity as here. Okay, special case, constant dividend. I hope you all know the Gordon Growth formula. If not, just look it up in the internet, it's easy to derive. If the dividend is going to the rate of G every year, then the present value is reducing to the very simple formula. And this is one of the mostly used formulas in finance, simply because you can do it on the back of an envelope. So every practitioner uses it. It's also the firm valuation that you will do, and you will use it for the terminal value. It's just very convenient. And if you just solve this formula for RE, then because you can again interpret the cost of equity as the dividend. The current dividend income plus the growth rate. And if you think about before we had dividend income plus capital gains. So basically this G replaces the capital gains. The growth rate and the capital gains is basically synonymous. Let's take a real world example for this, where almost everybody is using this. If you want to invest in real estate, not your own house, but something that is rented out to other people, then the most natural assumption is you know the starting rent. And that could be your dividend. And you know with inflation, rents are increasing. So at least you get the inflation rate back. Because rents increase with the inflation rate. And then you say, okay, I take today's rent, and I take some, I don't know what this is yet, but the inflation rate or the expected increase in the rent is what I put here. And this is what many people do. What other people also do is they say that the rent is not the overall dividend. If somebody pays me rent, then I still have to pay for maintenance and for some extra overhead costs. So usually you would say 80% of the rent is my effective income, or that could be paid out. So I take 80% of the rent here, but still, that's the G rate. And then you can basically nicely play around, and you will immediately, this is so simple, but if you compare 5 different houses, which you have to choose from, it will immediately, you just have to think carefully, what is the expected increase in rents in the longer term, what is the percentage of the rents that I can actually pay out to me, what is not maintenance. Now, of course, old buildings have higher maintenance, and buildings where the rent is currently very small have higher growth rates, and this formula is extremely helpful in really distinguishing between good and bad investment opportunities in the rental market, and therefore, for most people, for most professionals, the first quick and dirty model to basically sort out uninteresting houses, and then of course we should go into more detail at the end. So these formulas are really workhorses for many people, of course only for people that have studied finance. Once you study finance, you will do many decisions differently from others. Simply because you know this formula, and you always think about this formula when you think about an apartment house. And that clearly distinguishes you from other people. And if people that study finance become richer than other people, I don't know whether this is true, but some people believe so. Maybe because this way of thinking is helping them. So let's have a simple model of growth here. If you have earnings divided by the number of shares, then this is the earnings per share. And this is the real earnings, so this is your rent income after maintenance costs. That could be paid out completely, or it could be left in the firm. If you pay it out completely, then you would always have one house. One house, and you take the rent out of it, and this is your consumption, your profit. But suppose you leave 50% of the rent in the firm, then you can buy new houses. And basically, the dividend payout ratio will basically dictate the earnings growth ratio. Because if you don't pay out the full earnings, that means you have more money to grow. You have money left over to grow. This is most important. If you have an earning of $1, you can pay them out, or you can retain. And if you retain, you invest them, and then they will lead to more earnings in the future and to earnings growth. And clearly, $1 of earnings times 50% retention rate gives you 50 cents of new investment. And the earnings growth rate is, of course, the change in earnings divided by the earnings. And the change in earnings is, of course, new investment times, this new investment times the return of this new investment. And then basically theory tells you that if you have a constant retention rate, you always pay out only 50% of your earnings, then the growth rate of the dividends will equal the growth rate of earnings. I think we will do this tomorrow in a little example. I think that is, this is just written down here. I think we need to have an example to see this a little bit more. When you go to a shareholder meeting, typically the shareholders demand higher dividends. They always claim for higher dividends. And that is strange because you would say there is one optimal dividend. Everybody everybody should agree that the shareholder value should be maximized, yeah, and then there should be one optimal dividend decision. So shareholders may be simply stupid and naive to believe, yeah, that if they get more out, yeah, that this is to their benefit. Yeah? I see it more like I see the firm as a cake, yeah? And one part of the cake is also a bit of cash lying in the cake. Of course, you can take the cash out, yeah, but the cake will be less worth. Yeah? If you take $10 out of the cake, yeah, the cake will be worth $10 less. Yeah? So just increasing the dividend by 10 euros doesn't make any difference. Yeah? The only difference is the cash is now in the pockets of the shareholders, and before it was in the pockets of the firm. Yeah? But it's left pocket, right pocket. Yeah? Only if you believe that managers are evil and basically waste the money. Yeah? Some people say if there is cash in the firm, the manager will take it and have a nice whatever. He buys a big car for the firm, or an airplane, or he invites all his family and friends to a great party, and the party is paid by the firm. If you believe that managers behave like this, then of course taking the cash out of the firm is increasing the share price. But if you believe that the firm has great investment opportunities, then of course it should be invested, and you should realize this great project that we had at Cisco. If taking our cash kills investment, it could be value destroying. So the key question is, what is the right investment policy? And does the dividend change this? Maybe the firm says, okay, if the shareholders are so stupid and they force me to take out this €10 and pay it out, but nonetheless, I realize all the projects that generate shareholder value, and then I will ask for other financing sources. I will go to a bank and ask for a loan, or I do a capital increase and sell more shares. So only if you think that this has an impact on the real world investments, then it has an impact. So cutting the firm's dividend in order to increase the investment, so you need more money in the firm, to raise the stock price if the new investments have a positive NPV, that basically has another assumption behind it. That the investment can only be financed by not paying out the dividend. Later on, there were famous irrelevance principles in finance. Almost modern finance basically started with Modigliani Miller, saying that in perfect capital markets, almost everything is irrelevant. Leverage ratio is irrelevant, risk management is irrelevant, the dividend payout is irrelevant. So this sentence basically says, you cut the dividend, you make a positive NPV investment, and then the stock prices should go up. Assumes basically two things. First of all, you can convince the stock market, they believe the numbers, and if Elon Musk says this has a positive NPV, the shareholders say yes, okay, and basically have the same expectation. But the other reason is, the other thing is, of course, without this dividend cut, the investment cannot be financed, which is stupid, again. And this is the sad side of many textbooks, and this textbook is actually one of the best, I would say, but nonetheless, this sentence is, I would not write it down that way, because finance is, you really carefully think about assumptions and consequences. We try to be deep thinkers, and really to have logical conjectures, and the assumption here must be no information asymmetry. The stock market has the same information as Elon Musk, and that this dividend cut is needed for the investment, which is stupid when there are other financing vehicles. And therefore, this kind of questions, should we cut dividend and increase? The truth is, if you believe in this model here, yeah, then what are these dividends? Yeah, they are the profits from all projects, also projects that will start in the future. Yeah, if you buy Tesla stocks today, yeah, you know that in the future might come an robo-taxi, yeah, might come new business models, yeah, that Elon Musk is dreaming of. Yeah, that is all basically incorporated into the stock price. Yeah, and of course, nobody knows how many projects are in there and what kind of projects. Yeah? But if you think that you cut a dividend in order to increase investment, yeah, then only if this expectation basically is changed will the stock price be affected. Yeah? And in the finance theory textbook, you learn firms should realize all projects with positive value creation, with positive net present value. Yeah? If they follow this, yeah, then the investment portfolio, the projects are given. Yeah? In a world without any information asymmetry, in a world without any conflicts of interest, yeah, from whatever kind of firms are simple machines that calculate the net present value of everything and basically say, oh, it's yes, no, yes, no. Yeah? And all the yes projects create these dividends. And that's the stock price. Yeah? And if you then say, okay, I want to pay some less or more, yeah, then of course, possible. Yeah? If you go to a bank and say, yeah, the shareholders want the money right now, yeah, please lend me the money. Yeah? But yeah, with financing in a debt contract, you can just move the money from one year to another. It won't change the source of value. Yeah? The source of value is the projects with positive net present value. Yeah? And therefore, this is partly correct. Yeah? It is the positive net present value that basically makes the stock price increase. But here you also assume, yeah, that only with the dividend cut you can make this happen. Yeah, then of course there are some, but this is completely outdated. When you think about this model here, you have one growth rate from now into the future. Of course, you can basically say, let's assume that for 3 years you have growth rate 5%, and then for the infinite future afterwards you have growth rate of only 2%. Yeah, that is easy to calculate. The formulas get a bit more difficult, and that is basically what this textbook suggests here. Yeah. It's actually what some people do. Yeah, when you, for example, value a Continental is not a good example because Continental, your firm, is mature, yeah, so it doesn't have changing growth rates. But whenever you value smaller or younger companies, yeah, you usually assume that in the near-term future they grow strongly, yeah, but then in the long run, of course, everything flattens, and you may then use a different model. And one model should be that you forecast for the first 10 years, and then here you may have high growth, and here you have low growth. So basically here you have one growth rate, and here you have another growth rate that is somehow in these dividends incorporated. There were also other variants of this formula that I think are not really that interesting. What I want just to introduce you now, but then we leave. Total payout, this is what the textbook calls this. I call this rather free cash flow to firm model. Yeah, this is the investment bankers thing. Yeah, this is really going from this point of view to this point of view. Yeah, and when we continue tomorrow, we will have basically, yeah, you will see everything stays the same in the formula, yeah, but now we have free cash flows instead of dividends, yeah, and we have the weighted average cost of capital instead of the cost of equity. Yeah? And the only perspective is that we don't look at the dividends accruing to these guys, but we look at the cash flows produced by the assets that go to both debt and equity, and that's why we have a weighted average cost of capital between debt and equity. But that's for tomorrow. For today, we are done. Please have a look at this case assignment. Basically, it's the same kind of project calculation that you had here. And please remind what is incremental, what is sunk, what is an opportunity cost in order to solve this case. Thanks and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.